and a speaker who in many ways connect many or even most of the themes and topics that have been discussed here today. Ericsson is obviously a world leader in telecommunications and has been a world leader. I know when they had guests from Nokia over in Kista in the 80s, or when mobile telephony started taking off in the Nordics with GSM, they would say, yeah, you know, when we walk across this field here over to our main office, we usually wear our Nokian rubber boots. So they were kind of fond of pointing out that they were the first in that market. Ericsson is also a great example of a company that has scaled, that has stayed true to their goal. They accomplished the goal of having the goal stay the goal, as perhaps Mrs. Hillebrand would say, sorry. They have also been very kind to us at the museum and at the conference by becoming the main sponsor. Peter Linder, yes, give that. Peter Linder is responsible for 5G marketing for Ericsson in the United States, and there are several companies that are here on stage today and have been on stage that have a lot riding on the success of 5G, and I think Ericsson not the least of them. And I can't wait to hear and see what Peter's going to talk to or tell us about Ericsson and 5G in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. When I spoke to my wife and told her they're going to do this speech, they're going to speak after lunch, and most of the participants are going to have 9 to 10 hours jet lag. So she said, we can't do that alone. You need to bring some more folks with you. So I'm not going to be alone here. I'm going to have Ulf Evaldsson and Robert McCrory join us. We're going to take this next 40 minutes. The three of us are going to take you through some of the things that we see on 5G. Our company Ericsson, I'm very proud to spend almost 10,000 days at Ericsson and seen us taken through a number of different developments. The broadband development in the mid-90s to early mid-2000, and then the next big shift that we saw, the mobile broadband evolution. I think it was interesting when we in 2006 were starting to convey the idea to people that you could do broadband over the mobile networks, and people looked at we were totally crazy. We tried to explain to people that you could do it for $1 per gigabyte. At that point in time, people didn't really believe it. But data cards started to come, and the rest is history. And right now we're standing, I would say that we have been extremely successful with the whole development with the 4th generation of mobile technology, with smartphones essentially in every pocket. So here in the United States, the smartphone penetration is 93% as we speak, and has actually plateaued out at that level. A lot of people have 2 phones, so the actual amount of people that have smartphones in the US is 77%. And this has been a remarkably quick journey, but been very much driven by a single device, a single service, mobile broadband service or internet access, and a lot of the applications residing in the cloud at the other end. So as we look forward, the journey that we have ahead of us is to a lot of aspects very different from when we went from 3 to 4G. And so we're trying to put some color on that today. We're trying to cover 3 aspects to give you a perspective. The first one, I'm going to try to give you a perspective of what's going on in North America. US is one of the global driving markets in the world, and what we see is going on here. Ulf is going to bring you into how it all started with 5G. There's always, all technologies are born on a napkin, and Ulf was part of creating the napkin for 5G. It's very pleasant to have him on stage here. And Seattle, when I moved to the States 7 years ago. When I started to travel to Seattle, our office was 40 people here. Now we're around 500. So Robert's going to drive you a little bit seeing what's cooking and brewing locally here in the Seattle area, and what are the things that we're doing on the ground. So we hope that that gives you a rounded perspective of what 5G is and where it's going. The first thing, like we often talk about, is if the traffic is growing, we're consuming more and more megabits and megabytes. And we're at the very interesting stage of the North American market right now, where all the carriers are offering unlimited data plans, which is meaning that people don't try to find a hotspot any longer and trying to log over to that one. People are more connected to the network than ever before, and they stay connected to the mobile networks. So our prediction of the global mobile data traffic is that from now to over the next 6 years, the traffic is going to go 8 times. And we don't expect a whole lot of you to pay 8 times more for that service during this time. So a little bit the challenge we have as a provider of network equipment, if we were in the food business, we were creating superfood that allowed you to get 8 times more energy out of eating the same thing, not gaining weight, and sticking at the same price point. So that is this is very much the essence of what's driving our business. The traffic growth in itself is remarkable. And if you look at this chart, it's not that 5G is going to take over everything overnight. So 5G is going to carry portions of this, but it's the combination of 4G and 5G that's going to drive the market going forward. And the last point here, that video traffic is quickly growing. If you think back at the web in 1998, and we had like the dee-dee-dee-dee-dee back in the dial-up days, it was very much text and pictures. And if you think what you're doing on Facebook today, it's very much text and pictures. Behind that, we have a movement which is very much about the video and the moving pictures and more advanced forms of moving pictures. And that is going to come into play a lot more over the 6-year planning period that we're looking at. To the point where we expect at the end of this period, there are going to be 70% of the traffic that we today call data will actually be video. And each of those bits has a lot less value than perhaps the bits that are really important in the network. The other thing, if we look at the operator situation, on the left-hand side of the picture, that describes the market for mobile broadband and what is smartphone-driven today. We call it enhanced mobile broadband, where we see a global market of around $1.5 trillion. And this is operator revenues that are growing slightly upwards, but it's not the phenomenal growth, because we have essentially penetrated, we're running out of people. And in order for, we talked a little bit in the beginning here, if your valuation and where you're going as a company is very much tied to growth. So the industry is looking, where do we find the next growth trajectory? And that's where a little bit where 5G is coming in and seeing what role will 5G play in the digitalization of other industries. So our industry has very much been driving a lot of what we're doing has been driven in the telecommunication industry with phones, networks, and network operators. That's very much fueled the left-hand side of the picture. As we move over to the right-hand side of the picture, we're having more and more conversations with other industries. What we can do, what can 5G do for them? What can we do that's different than the plain vanilla mobile broadband offering with 4G? And this is a conversation that's actually started 4 years ago. That's when we started to see an increase in these types of conversations. We're actually saying, we know that you have we expect a new generation coming down the road. What can we use it for, and what role will it play? So a lot of the growth for operators are very much tied to exploiting these type of new revenues, which is very different from what the network operator have been doing in the past. So there's 4 different fields that we normally talk about where these opportunities take place. The first box is pretty much what we know, the business that is known and predictable, and where we know the performance requirements and we know the scale requirements. Performance requirements are going up, and scale we pretty much hit as far as we can. This is a $1.5 trillion opportunity, which is eventually where 5G going to transform something that exists today. The next one is something that we have been doing a lot in the wireless world. We have typically used wireless technologies for fixed broadband applications, either in rural areas or in urban areas where there was difficult to reach with wires. This is something that we have done essentially since 1G technology over and over and over again. In the past, we have done it 3 to 5 years after we have made the technology successful for mobile applications. For 5G, this is what we discuss doing right now with US operators, so doing both fixed and mobile from the start. And the reason why we're doing this is that certain operators, Verizon, have gone out and said that they have today 15 million fixed subscribers and 100 million mobile subscribers. They're interested in providing fixed wireless services outside where they have a fixed footprint. They see an addressable market for that of around 30 million households in the US alone. And they've trialed the technology, 5G technology, and see they can reach 2,000 feet or 600 meters. They can provide a gigabit of service, and they can reach not only 600 meters in that direction, they also see that they can reach 20 stories high into the network. So this has opened up for new ways of going fiber close to the subscribers, and then instead of going fiber the last bit, using 5G technology, the last bit to users. The next one is what we call massive IoT application. This is Internet of Things, of the things that are smaller and perhaps represent a reasonably small value. So my camera, for example, I can connect my phone for $70 a month, but I wouldn't connect my camera for $70 a month. And a lot of other things that I have that's growing in my portfolio of digital devices I use. So this is very much tied to all things that a consumer buy, and that products that can be enhanced by being connected one way or another. The things that 5G make a difference here are things like battery life and being able to support large number of devices in one geographical area. And the final bit is what we call critical IoT. This is more advanced applications, for example, connecting cars, making sure that they don't collide with each other, where we're working very much on driving down the latency of the network, so at-width page data bits can go across the network. Gamers, anyone here that's a gamer? We didn't have that many. Gamers never play over mobile networks. They get to play over wired networks, and they get to play over in a room with a wired network. That's an example of an application that's actually, if you would sit on a mobile network, the delays would be, you'll lose out and be shut down all the time. There's a lot of these kind of applications that are latency sensitive that we can change with 5G. It's also the fact that we're putting up a new number of new applications on the network, for example, natural safety and public security. These kind of things, like there was a disaster in Houston last year. When those kind of things happen, you can rely on the 5G network, but then of course steering over the capacity so the first responders get priority in the network over everybody else that want to tell friends and family that they're safe. So these four areas is broadly representing the categories where we see 5G opportunities, driven by different drivers with different complexity in how to deploy it, or the performance challenges, and how to scale it. So now we're sitting with, we have a chart with 400 different use cases where we're looking at in which box do they fit, when do we think that they will happen, and what would be the difference that 5G can make. All of this, we expected to drive a growth of 36%. 36% of growth for operators up to 2026. So growing the business that by then will be 1.7 trillion by another 600 billion on top of that. We can segment that a little bit based on the role operators will take in the network. So up until now, all operators are doing very similar things. Going forward, we expect operators to take different roles in the market. And the situation for operators to operate in the US and can strike up strong agreement with US companies, both to serve the US market and go abroad. that is very different from what a Canadian operator can do in terms of exploiting these different use cases. So we're starting to see differences here in how operators act, in which roles they take from market to market. We've looked into this, and this represents the analysis and studies we've done, covers the 10 most important industries where we see the largest potential first, with manufacturing being the largest and agriculture being the smallest. So you can go into each and every of these industries and actually asking the questions, what difference could 5G make here? What are the kind of use cases that you would be interested in doing? When would you do it? So it's fairly spread across these different industries. And I think the only thing that people are really in agreement on, that they want to do it, they want to do it now, they don't know exactly what they're going to do, but they're going to start and trial it and test it. So there's a very large innovation element into this across all industries, with very similar patterns between these different industries. And the journey we see ahead of us from left to right here is very much, we're in the process right now of securing the current network with gigabit capabilities. So just looking at how fast is a network doesn't tell the whole story. We are bringing the speed in the network up for the current 4th generation technology right now. When we're launching 5G, we're going to launch it very much so it's very intercoupled with the 4G networks. So we're not going to build a whole 5G network on top to complement the 4G network that was there. They're going to be a lot tighter together than we've seen in previous generations. And as we then move along, we're going to see what are the use cases we can introduce that enhance an existing service. So something that we're doing with 4G today that can become better with 5G. And then as we move along, we will look at new use cases which cannot be done today, which require 5G to happen. So it's a little bit of a balance here. They would say, well, do I really need 5G? Can't I do it with 4G? Well, you can do certain things that can be better with 5G, and then come other things that will make a difference. A few things here. Enhanced mobile broadband is what we use as a term for describing what's going on with smartphones. We know that there's screens everywhere right now. What we see this is going is more towards immersive entertainment experiences, and I had to look up immersive to understand what the heck it means. It's more or less when you get the feeling as if you were there, as if you were participating. For example, very interesting for sports events and similar things. The automotive, it's very much on-demand information today. If you buy a new car, you can get a lot of information onto the screen in the car. The evolution here is taking us to self-driving cars and autonomous control, and cars talking to each other, making sure that they don't crash. And I normally joke about it, saying sitting in the traffic jam back and forth to work in Dallas, and say the best way to add lanes to the highway is to eliminate the wrecks during rush hour. Because most roads has 4 lanes, and you can roll at 60 miles an hour or 100 kilometers an hour when there's no traffic there. But during rush hour, it's almost a wreck. It takes out 2 lanes, and we're down to 50 kilometers an hour in the other ones. What we are doing in North America to make sure that this can happen, we've done a couple of things. The first one is advancing the standards. The whole mobile world is depending on standards. And the US and the Korean operators found out a while ago, say, hey, we need it faster than the industry has planned for. Can you bring it up a year and a half or 2 earlier? So what we've been working closely with operators, making sure that the standards could be put in place faster than was planned for. The second thing we've been doing, we've been working a lot with expanding the ecosystem beyond the mobile industry, helping other industries to understand what the potential is, what can be done, and trying to get rid of all the acronyms so it's more in plain language, what are the opportunities to be done. We have deployed a lot of trials, and we are not very used to, as a network industry, to deploy non-industrialized or non-released products in the network. We've done that for 5G to allow operators to get a lot of experiences. And we're doing trials with double-digit players in the US and Canada today. So it's more than actually our mobile network operators. There's a number of different players that are evaluating this, even they're not in the business yet. And the final thing we've done is we've spent a lot of effort and energy into trying to articulate the potential. What can really be done? Because most people see the broadband network. Yeah, I got a phone and now I can go a little bit faster, but don't really feel a little bit to imagine to break away from the linear thinking that was mentioned earlier today. So this is pretty much what a snapshot of what's going on, what we're doing in North America for 5G. And now I've got the great pleasure here of introducing Ulf. And Ulf, as I said, every technology has a napkin where it all started. Ulf was writing on that napkin for Ericsson's side, and welcome Ulf, and tell us about where it all started.
Thank you, Peter, and great to be here. Big pleasure to address you today. I was not really going to be here, so I'm not in your program, so I'm going to introduce myself. I am Ulf Evaldsson. I was the CTO and the Chief Strategy Officer for Ericsson for many years, and led the radio division for many years, and later led a division called Digital Services. And now I have the pleasure of having a very easy job, which is advisor to the CEO. Now, since this is an innovation conference, I thought I'd make a few points about the napkin. Everything in here, and we've not talked too much about the napkin, but most things start on the napkin. So it was in San Diego in 2012, some CTOs, weird bunch, got together and we were thinking about making the next generation. Now I have to make one point very clear, because I got this question at the University of Washington where I was speaking last night. How come you only talk about big companies? This is all about small companies. And the truth is that every large company is totally dependent on small companies. We buy them every day, and they want to be bought, so that's not an issue. But we also have a lot of people in doing things in the big company, which easily makes them leave and start a company. So we also create companies by the day. So there is no big, small thing. Then, secondly, there is a weird thing about the telco industry, and Peter was a little bit into that. It's a totally standardized industry. Why is that? Otherwise, nothing works, right? Telco means talking to others. And that means if someone has one thing, the other thing also has to talk to the other thing, and that means it has to be built on standards. And it has been so since 1876, when Alexander Graham Bell, great innovator, big startup guy, invented the phone. And therefore, the standards regime in the telecom sector is built on something called FRAND, which is where we cross-license all the innovation to each other. So we haven't talked so much about that, even though this is an innovation conference, but licensing is a very big part of both making money and also making sure that industries can grow very fast. So we got together in San Diego Harbor, and after a couple of drinks, we should talk about the next generation. Now it's interesting that we're here at the Nordic Museum because Nordics did something very good very early. We launched and innovated something called Nordisk Mobiltelefoni, NMT. And that is generation 1. We didn't call it that because no one knows when 1G, it's kind of... But the second generation got the name 2G. And that was made as a project to create a European standard for mobile telephony. GSM, it means Group Special Mobile. And later meant Global System for Mobile Communication. So we had that in us. We knew that we were going to have to create a new generation. And this time, in 2012, the mobile traffic in the world was approaching 5 exabytes. You were talking about 8 times growth. We're going to reach to 100 exabytes. That's where we're going in the time frame that you talked about. But at that time, we were approaching 5 exabytes. What is 5 exabytes? How much is that? 18 zeros, right? It also corresponds to every word that human race has ever spoken. I don't know how they know that, actually. Anyway, so first word, good, one. Anyway, so, but it is an enormous amount of traffic, and we were sitting there in 2012 already having that. We were approaching about 2 billion smartphones in the world. There was at that time, in 2012, about 7.5 billion subscriptions, mobile subscriptions, based on about 4.5 billion subscribers. 4G was just being rolled out, and we had just reached, if I remember it right, 300 million something users on 4G. And here we were to think about the next generation, creating new technology. It takes time, and every generation has taken about 10 years in the mobile industry. If you think back about it, 2G was launched in 1992, 3G was launched 2002 in Tokyo, I was there, and then 2012, we were a bit early with 4G. It was actually launched in 2010 by Verizon, large scale, here in the United States. And we were thinking about creating a new generation, and we said already that back then that what is happening is that microprocessing is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, so there's going to be a microprocessor in everything around us. Why don't we put a small transmitter together with that silicon that goes into everything, and that would be 5G. Thus we got to what is today called massive machine communication and massive IoT, and also critical machine communication and critical IoT. But those terms were not invented at that time, but now they are. 5G then, what is critical? Critical means that you can remote control something. You talked about the total experience. It also includes something called haptic technology. Haptic technology is when the technology responds back to you, that it's actually receiving signals or muscle strength or similar things. All of those things were on the rise, so we said there's got to be a critical component of remote control into 5G, and that's where the big promise lies, in building macro networks, real coverage of population that could actually do that. When we sat there, 4G had reached a coverage which was approaching 10% only. Today, how much of the world's population has 4G coverage? No one would know that probably, but it's around 55–60%. And in the next next 5 years, it will grow to 85%. So we're in a and that means truly smartphone experience, because 4G is the one that really gives the good smartphone experience. Now, if we did the same thing with this machine type of communication, imagine what could be done. So there we were, getting excited. We also realized, and at that time I had visited, during the day there, I had visited a research center in San Diego that was doing military research on remote operations. So remote surgery, So we started to say, this is going to revolutionize the way of remote. So one thing we said, that we got to incorporate that. And that means that we needed the critical capability to be built into that 5G standard. And we also realized that AR and VR is going to be part of it, because that's how you actually get the experience of doing that. So that means that mobile broadband, you pointed out the vector of the personal experience. And here you're going to see that it always starts in a consumer way and then goes back to enterprise. So we see VR, AR, probably much a consumer application in the beginning, and then quickly being adopted to be used by enterprise for various kinds of usage. The multi-access part of it is really the broadband, the fixed broadband going together with the mobile broadband. We put that onto napkin as well, and we had a complete napkin with requirements. And then after that, we had another glass of wine. No. Then after that, the industry goes off and do the research. So we launched then a number of research projects. These requirements, which today are very well known in terms of latency, for example, 5G has latency numbers of less than 3 milliseconds compared to LTE, which has latency numbers of a little bit north of 25 milliseconds perhaps. 3G is even higher, 30 something plus. And if you go 2G, has 100 milliseconds delay. So these kind of delays was very important. Battery life length. Well, if we're going to have sensors everywhere, sensors everywhere that are connected and feeding in. And we didn't even realize that that was going to be the foundation of AI, because it is. AI technology is where you loop information from as many sources as you possibly can and draw new conclusions and program things to do things by themselves. Those sensors would have to have enormous battery life length, and therefore in 5G you never need to recharge them. So it's more than 10 years battery life length of the smallest sensors in 5G. This was a tremendous evening. You can understand how we felt. But the research has then been done, and we're proud to stand here with a technology that is about to be launched, and Peter explained what we're doing here in the United States. We're doing globally. China is going to use 5G to modernize their entire industry. So the government of China has set aside trillions of dollars only in China to modernize their entire industry. Now China is a company, right? The entire nation is a company. It's how it works in a communist state. So they are putting these resources to play. We need to find a market economy way of doing this. And I've said in many times and many speeches I've made that we should probably be looking at 5G a little bit like building airports and railroads. But we need to find a way of looking at it so that private enterprise can thrive in that kind of environment and make the investments. I know we are here in Seattle, and there was something happening here on Monday on television, I noticed, with a couple of operators thinking about merging or whatever it was. And that's because of that money that is needed. And they went also and spoke about China and spoke about US competitiveness to be able to do this. And they are right. It's a hard message, but they are right. This is going to be a race about modernizing industry and modernizing enterprises over time using this technology advantage. We don't grab that ball in the Western world, and I'm even more worried about Europe, to be honest, where the sentiment is so-so around doing these investments and so-so about bringing these new services to life that this technology can actually enable. We are going to be left behind between other countries that are moving ahead. After all, the United States was the country that thrived from putting a man on the moon and had the capability of coming together to actually do these kinds of things. I am very optimistic that here in the US market, we will see this happen to a very, very big degree. I also think that the napkin that we wrote in the harbor of San Diego will be historic in the sense that we created something new. I was delighted to address you today, and thank you very much for listening to me.